I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus and Bowling Green, Ohio. This is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together, Rebecca and I are going to spend the next hour telling you all about ecology and the environment. And we're going to tell you about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families and your coworkers and the birds, some of whom have already started migrating and others of whom are like, are we migrating this year? Because we're in some very confusing times right now. It's, it was roasting yesterday. Oh, happy fall equinox, by the way, September.
It's when they start going the opposite. When they start going north in September, we've really got a problem.
Yeah, good point. And, a lot of people are heading north now because it's gotten so hot down in the south. But we're going to have a great show. We're going to just chat for a few minutes here and about 10. And at any point, please feel free to call in at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. This is a call-in show. This is why Rebecca and I do this live every Sunday. We had a very nice call, although a very difficult call last week. And if you're somebody who heard that, and you want to respond to it, please chime in. So we're going to chat for just a few more minutes, and then we're going to have a great interview with a scientist named Dylan Gomes, and he studies the effects of marine heat waves on the different flora and fauna, and he has come up with a kind of a shocking development on the West Coast that nobody saw coming, because something that's happening because of these heat waves. So we'll learn about that. Then it's our advertisers and patrons, to whom we are eternally grateful. And then Rebecca, it'll be your turn. And what will you be talking about this week?
I will be talking about the Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge.
Refuge,
in
right? Yeah.
Oak Harbor.
Okay.
Oak Harbor. Yep.
Very nice. Very nice subject. And then it's ecological news, and as usual, we have a mix of good and bad news. The first story, the bad news story, is how we talk about how global warming affects your wealth, your health, and your happiness. Well, turns out there's a direct health effect of heat waves that people never really appreciated before, but could affect anybody in our listening audience. So stay tuned for that. All right, but of course, as I said, we're going to talk about eco-observations for the week, and if you're at all eco-observant, you'll notice that we are actually having a drought here in Ohio. In fact, 98% of Ohio is in one level of drought or another, and that's going from what the Department of Agriculture lists as D0, which is extremely dry, all the way up through D4, which is like super critical, everything's dead level drought. And 98% of Ohio is in a drought state right now. D4 is what they call exceptional drought. So we here in northwest or southwest, we here in northwest Ohio, we're mostly in D1, which is what's considered severe drought. But southeast Ohio is in D4, exceptional drought. So here crops are being affected, rivers are drying up. I was telling Rebecca on the way in, there's a pond outside of Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green that has this big boulder that the students paint every year when they come in, and normally there's like this water line.
I think it's completing sororities and fraternities.
Yeah,
if I'm remembering
right.
correctly.
Sororities and fraternities will paint it. They have like a competition, and normally about a third of the boulder is underwater, so the paint goes down to this line. But this year, right now, that boulder is like completely out of the water. The shore is like, yards away from it because the pond has shrunk so much. And that's true of rivers. The Maumee's really dry. And actually, we have a town to our south. I believe it's Findlay that their reservoir has gone almost dry, so they've had to pump water out of their deep wells, water which stinks
Oh,
and
dear.
puts a terrible odor out into the community when it comes out from under the ground and gets into the pond. And so, global warming stinks, folks. I mean, literally.
It really does.
Yeah. So, and pasture land around here, 93% of the pasture land in Ohio is in either poor or very poor condition, and 23 counties have been declared natural disasters by the Department of Agriculture, which means the farmers are eligible for loans, but it also means that their crops have failed. So it's nice you can get a loan, but it would have been nicer if you'd been able to harvest. So the thing about this drought, this is one of the predicted effects of global warming, and one thing about this is that we, meaning we environmentalists, we scientists, we people who pay attention to this topic, have been warning everybody for decades, a long time. And this is actually yesterday was actually the 10th anniversary of one of the biggest of those warnings that has been organized to date, and that was the People's Climate March in New York City back in 2014. And that march brought over 400,000 people out to New York City to march, demanding some sort of action on climate issues. Still the largest mass gathering, the environmental protest in the U.S. history. It was passed 2 years later. There was a global climate action that was led by Greta Thunberg that was a little bit bigger, but People's Climate March is still the biggest in the U.S. history, and it was amazing. I was there. It was just incredible to be surrounded by so many people. In fact, we were all lined up there in Central Park to do this march around Manhattan, and it was supposed to start marching, I believe it was at 11 o'clock in the morning, and we were just standing there, right, waiting, and 11:30, 12 o'clock, 12:30, we're like, what's wrong? Why aren't we moving? And what we discovered is the march had begun at 11. There were just so many people
Wow.
that an hour and a half later, the line hadn't gotten back to us yet.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, yeah.
My experience with that was that it came through here when there were 10 people on it left, and of the people who were. Some probably more started out in California, and it swells, and like most cross country marches, it swells and dwindles and then swells again. That's kind of what they do. And we went out and all did a die-in at the local refinery,
Right.
one of the little mushroom ring of refineries and nuke
Yeah.
plants around Toledo.
I think the big BP refineries
Yeah,
were.
probably.
And simultaneous things were happening in 166 countries.
Which is very interesting to
So-
me because there was at least one woman there who had been on the original Great Peace March, which I also went to Washington for
Yeah.
in the 80s.
And so, the actual number worldwide was much higher than 400,000, but
Right.
it was just a beautiful event. They had different sections So like there was an indigenous people section, and there were, thousands and thousands of indigenous people from around the world, a lot of them in their traditional garb. There was a vegan section. I took a van load of people down, and a fair number of them were actually vegans, and they went to the vegan section, and they had one of the coolest floats. They had like this 30-foot cow that
Everybody wants a 30-foot cow.
yeah, they were marching down the middle of Manhattan. Then I was actually in the anti-nuclear section, which had a lot of people, and because real environmentalists understand that yes, we have to do global warming, but no, we can't do it via radiation. It needs to be wind and solar and geothermal.
We have to do global cooling, hopefully.
Yeah.
You said we have to do global warming.
There was a faith section, so a lot of people coming to climate action from their faith. There was a science section, a lot of people coming to global, warming activism from their practice of science.
What do the churchy vegan scientists who don't like nukes go?
Well, they would just circulate it.
Okay,
they would
all right.
go, from one to the
I
other.
see.
There was
Okay.
no, there were no ropes separating.
And
us.
what if they're indigenous too?
Yeah. Then they put on more miles than most.
Yeah, I
but
guess.
everybody was welcome. That was the thing.
Yeah.
And one of the main things we were protesting was Obama's all of the above energy strategy.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, wind and solar, but also fracking and also nuclear and also, no. All of the above is not a strategy. All of the above is a lack of a strategy. It's an inability to choose good things over bad things. And unfortunately, it really is still the policy today of the Biden administration because, we are pumping out record amounts of fossil fuels right now. We're fracking like crazy. And, this policy is essentially suicide.
And like every cent you put into nuclear or fracking or anything like that is bad because it means less solar and wind.
Exactly.
It's a self-sabotaging strategy.
Right. So basically, when I went to the Global Climate March 10 years ago, it was an amazing outpouring of hope because we saw so many people. Because what was happening and what is still happening today is the forces like the fossil fuel companies are trying to create this impression of Americans that, we don't accept global warming. We're that the whole country is global warming deniers. And when 400,000 people showed up for this protest, which is more than double the number they were expecting, frankly, it showed the world that no, Americans do believe in global warming and want something done about it, and we're still demanding it 10 years later. And so the fact that we have a presidential candidate in Trump who's saying drill baby drill, in other words, ignore the science, ignore the drought that's happening to you right now. I don't know about your household, but my house got really hot last night. This is fall, all right? It's supposed to be getting cool, and instead it was incredibly hot. So pay attention to the dead leaves around you. I went for a walk the other day, and all the trees are losing their leaves, and they're crunching underfoot, because they're dry, because there's been almost no rain. So look at what's really happening around you and stop listening to people who are denying reality. Because the more you do that, basically the more in trouble you are, and the more in trouble all of us are, because we all need to work together on this to stop the global warming, to stop putting CO2 in the air. And just sort of an announcement for Americans, one of the biggest ways you could reduce your carbon footprint is to drive an electric car. Well, the biggest way, of course, is not to drive a car at all, to use public transportation. But if you're going to drive a car, which most people in the U.S. need to drive, because they're far from their businesses or shopping, or
because crappy public transportation.
Because of crappy public transportation. So if you must drive electric. And this is just an announcement. This is not an ad because I'm not getting paid for it or anything. But Thayer Chevrolet in Bowling Green, which is at 1225 North Main, which is the Main Street, 5:30 to 7:30 on Monday, they're going to showcase all the electric cars that all the different dealers have. So if after listening to this show you've become EV curious, go check it out on Monday at Thayer, 5:30 to 7:30, because you can do test drives, and there'll be salesmen there to explain, just how wonderful EVs are, because they really are. And they should be advertising with us. Gosh darn it! But that's something to check out. So anyway, even as the world burns, those of us who've been advocating for doing something about it are still advocating. We're not going to shut up.
Oh, that reminds me. I saw my very first Tesla truck in the wild yesterday.
Oh, a Cybertruck. Wow. Okay.
Best automotive design since the Edsel, folks.
Yeah. I think bread box. That's what I think when I see one.
Yeah, a little. Yeah, it's weird looking.
All right. Well, so anyway, we're having heat waves here on land, but at the same time, they're also happening in the ocean. And one of the unforeseen side effects of that is the abundance of this super weird creature, which you're about to learn about from our interview with Dylan Gomes. So let's go to that interview now.
All right. Hello, and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and who you're with?
Yeah, my name's Dylan Gomes. I'm currently with the USGS, but a lot of the work we're going to talk about today, I did while working with Oregon State University and NOAA Fisheries.
Okay, cool. And what we're going to talk about today is the effect of marine heat waves on ecosystems, marine ecosystems, basically. So first, let's start with some basic definitions. What is a marine heat wave?
Yeah, that's a great question. A marine heat wave is similar to a heat wave on land. Basically, it's when we have anomalously warm conditions. So, and anomalously meaning, anytime the ocean is warmer than normal, and that can be defined in different ways. So it could be, a degree above normal temperatures for a certain amount of time, and there's a lot of kind of debate on what exactly that is. But it's essentially when ocean temperatures are much warmer than normal.
Okay, and so you basically looked at sort of a specific area in the Pacific, and you modeled what would happen to the different populations of different creatures before and after these heat waves. It's very interesting. There's definitely winners and losers here. So like, who does better and who does worse?
Yeah, that's an important point. Well, who does better is relatively easy. There are a few winners, but the big one is the pyrosomes. So these are pelagic, free floating out in the open ocean, what are called tunicates. So it's this kind of odd creature that, if you haven't spent any time around the ocean, might look like some sort of alien thing. But it's this floating, kind of pink gelatinous critter. And pyrosomes literally translates to fire body. And so they can kind of bioluminesce at night in different regions of the world. There are lots of different species of pyrosomes. But in the Northeast Pacific Ocean, off the west coast of the United States, folks hadn't seen pyrosomes that far north ever. And so after these marine heat waves that started around the winter of 2013, there were pyrosomes blooming in massive abundances off the coasts of Oregon and Washington. And again, those had never been there before, so it was a pretty substantial change.
Yeah, so you say gelatinous. The pictures I've seen, they kind of look like tube socks. Is that a good description? But like a translucent tube sock.
Yeah, and they're they are more rigid than a jellyfish. So we say jellyfish are gelatinous as well, but if you held a jellyfish in your hand out of the water, it would just sort of sag and be floppy. But the pyrosomes are actually pretty rigid, but they are still gelatinous. They're They don't have any bones or anything like that. They do break apart pretty easily. But yeah, they are this long, sort of cylindrical, transparent thing that basically pulls in water in one side and filter feeds different things out of the water, and then spits the rest back out.
Hmm. Okay, so they're the big winners. So we get an ocean with lots of these pyrosomes floating around. It looked to me, looking at your charts and graphs there, like some of the losers were like some of the most important fish to us, like in terms of what we like to eat and things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I think a lot of that starts lower in what we call the food web, or lower down on the food chain. And so these pyrosomes that exploded consume a lot of little things, right, that are at the base of the food web, or lower down on the food chain, and that can redirect energy flow throughout the food web. So a lot of our fish species eat things like krill, also known as euphausids, so these small little crustaceans that are swimming around in great abundances. And krill were one of the things that declined during this marine heat wave period relative to before. And so there could be some potential links there. It's really difficult to know conclusively if the pyrosome bloom caused the decrease in krill, or if it was something else related to temperatures of the ocean, or something else entirely, right? So it's really difficult to point fingers, but there is a really compelling story there.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the pyrosomes eat the small stuff. So I guess that means there's less of the things that the stuff we like to eat, like cod, for example. Um, there's less food for the cod, so we end up with more pyrosomes and fewer cod.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we are, guessing that might be going on.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other, small forage fish, for example, that declined greatly, but there are always great swings in populations of certain animals. So anchovy and sardine on the West Coast have big boom and bust cycles, and it's really difficult. Scientists have been studying those populations for many decades. It's very difficult to know exactly what causes those booms and bust cycles. For a long time, it was thought, that one did better in warmer waters and the other did better in colder waters. And then during the marine heat wave, that sort of flipped. And so there's a lot we don't know, and it can be difficult to say, for sure that it's caused by the marine heat wave or not, or the exact pathway. And so this work that we did here was really to track all of the energy flow throughout the food web, and try to start to get an idea of how food webs and energy flow have changed during and after these marine heat waves.
Mm-hmm. So your research actually focused quite a bit on trophic levels, right? Which is the different energy levels in terms of, the base being the producers like algae and things, and then the stuff that eats the algae is the next trophic level, and the stuff that eats them is the next trophic level.
Well, I would say the biggest impacts, from a biomass perspective, are at the lower trophic levels. So the biggest changes in energy flow are the smaller things down low, but that can sort of trickle up through the food web, if you will, to the higher trophic levels.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So so this study was done with a computer modeling system called EcoPath. Um, and so what are the points of like actual numbers of marine organisms versus where sort of the computer predictions and modeling came in? What's the relationship between those two things?
That's an excellent question. I think the word modeling gets thrown around a lot in science, and it always kind of means something slightly different. So to just back up and define that a little bit is, you know, a model is just a heuristic. It's something that we use to try to understand the world around us. And that could be really simple. Like, let's say we want to understand the height of people in a room. You could sample half the people and you would build a model just by taking the average height and saying, okay, what's the probability that the next person who walks in is this height or whatever. That's a model. It's a really simple one. And so for this ecosystem modeling, we try to incorporate as much information as we can, but there is definitely some estimation, as you are pointing out. And so there are 103 different functional groups in the model. And so what a functional group is essentially a collection of species that act somewhat similarly in the ecosystem. So, you know, there's a couple of different species of sea lions, for example. They do have slightly different diets, slightly different behaviors, but we combine them and sort of average over those diet differences and the biomass differences and things like that. And so, you know, there's only so much detail you can incorporate before everything becomes really cumbersome. And so it's this approach is to try to find a good balance there. And so for every one of these functional groups in the ecosystem, we try to get detailed biomass information about them. So how much of them are there in different areas. And this basically scales everything else that happens. So if we know how many salmon, for example, a sea lion eats, well, we need to know how abundant those sea lions are and how abundant those salmon are to truly try to understand how much energy is flowing. And so we also incorporate things like physiological rates, so growth rates, how much energy is turned into feces, or sort of is lost to the ecosystem through old age, senescence. You know, if animals are dying before being consumed, they can fall to the bottom of the ocean floor and start being broken down by bacteria or other critters that consume detritus, which is what we call all the dead, you know, stuff, everything from small particles to big particles. And so we try to account for a lot of different things. And there's a big nutrient recycling component where nutrients are brought to the surface by physical processes called upwelling. And that upwelling, the physical transport of the ocean, brings those nutrients to the surface where phytoplankton can then use that with the sun's energy to grow more phytoplankton. And so this particular suite of ecosystem models that we use are called end-to-end ecosystem modeling. And another way to put that is from physics to fisheries. So we start with the physics of the ocean. In this case, it was upwelling, and that can drive the productivity of the ocean. And then that energy is transferred up the food web all the way to top predators and eventually to the fishery fleets.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just briefly, there are a lot of things that are difficult to understand. The ocean is a harsh place. It's a huge place. It's very costly to study. And there are a lot of critters that we just don't know a ton about. So there are a lot of what we call benthic organisms down at the bottom of the ocean floor that are really hard to estimate. What's the biomass there? But we might have lab studies that tell you about the growth rates or how much food they need to ingest, things like that. And so we can set those parameters, and then we can estimate how much biomass we think the ecosystem should have of those critters to balance everything out, right? Because we have predators, we know a lot of diets, so we can say all these different predators are this abundant on the seascape, so to speak, and they're eating this many, say mollusks, a clam or something,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can take all this information and sort of fix it a little bit, right, and constrain it, and then we can estimate something that's missing, like the biomass of that critter, and say, okay, we think it's within this range.
Right.
Because if it was any more than that, it would overconsume its prey, and if it was any less than that, there wouldn't be enough available for all the predators that we think are eating it. And so we can get a pretty good idea. But, there's still a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of movement in all of those parameters, right? There are a lot of possible solutions that make the ecosystem work. And so we also do a lot of simulating that. So we can take, thousands of different versions of this food web, and we can run models, and then that's how we get our uncertainty bounds around our final estimates.
I see. Yeah. And without being able to make these predictions, these estimates, just if you can't make at least educated guesses about what's going to happen, you're just sort of like observing everything after the fact. So I think, it seems like an important part of being a scientist is being able to make these predictions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the goal is we want to be able to understand the world around us and extract something useful out of it. And it doesn't always happen. There are plenty of times where we build a model and then go, okay, well, there are just too many uncertainties here. So now let's play with the parameters and say, well, what if it's this? What if it's that? What if it's this? Then we can at least see how important that missing information is, and how, whether we should go out and try to collect those data.
So just the last, I always ask my guests if there's anything they'd like to add, anything you feel our audience should know that we haven't covered.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I guess the last thought I have is that our oceans are incredibly important, around the world, just for our survival, a lot of people's livelihoods, cultural significance. Obviously we get a lot of food from the ocean, and so trying to better understand it is really important, and trying to figure out how we can not abuse that system, how we cannot take too much, especially in times of marine heat waves, which are exacerbated by climate change. And these same sorts of the same sort of idea is true on land too, and freshwater systems. But it's really easy to abuse the ocean because we don't live in it. We don't see it, we don't experience it the same way, and we view it as this gigantic, vast, infinite supply of resources, and it's truly not. So those are just some parting thoughts.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you folks for listening to our interview with Dylan Gomes. And those pyrosomes he talked about, really weird critters. They're colonial organisms. And the nearest thing I could think of that most of us might have seen is back in the old Star Trek, the original series, they had this thing called the Planet Killer in one of the episodes that was zooming through space, eating planets. It's just this big long tube with a huge mouth, and that's what these pyrosomes are. They're really bizarre things. Check them out on Google the image. All right, and we also, now it's time to hear from our advertisers and patrons. Let's hear from them now.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
And we're also very grateful for the support of our wonderful patrons. And these are people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. They searched for Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page with a bunch of cool pictures. One of which actually is from that trip to the People's Climate March 10 years ago that I talked about. And once they've chosen the level of membership that matches their budget, they sign up, and every week a little bit comes out of every month, a little bit comes out of their account, comes over to us, and that's how we can afford to keep this show on the air. And we are continuing to offer as a bonus to anyone who signs up to become a patron, you will receive a free copy of my book, Vedusification, which is a book of short stories, and quite good ones, too, if I may add. All right. So, Rebecca, let's hear about what you're going to talk about. Let's hear about the Wildlife Refuge.
Okie dokie. Well, yesterday, me and my friend, memoirist and essayist Rebecca Golden, who's living in Detroit but has Toledo roots, went out to the Marblehead Bay State Park to go swimming, like we like to do sometimes. It's a really pretty little park. It's got its own unique charm. It's got it's like you're enclosed almost on four sides because you got an island out in front of you, and you got like the Catawba and Marblehead Peninsulas on either side, and then like the refuge behind you, or the state park behind you. So it's got its own vibe. It's not like a big, wild, impressive beach like you'd find in Lake Michigan or the ocean or something, but it's really pretty in its own way. And got all kinds of sandbar, more than usual, relating to Joe's earlier drought comment. So I on the way though, you pass all kinds of stuff. It's the part of Ohio that goes weirdly New Englandy, while at the same time, because you got to drive along the coastline to get it on Route 2 or Route 6 or something, and you look on one side, there's like marshes and bays and rivers, and then sometimes like you're suddenly on water on two sides because the swamp is spread to the other side, and then sometimes on the right, going out, you got cornfields and stuff, really, really flat cornfields because it's Northwest Ohio. So, flattest cornfields you have ever seen. So, I mean, it's one of those landscapes that looks at the same time bizarre because it doesn't look like what you've been told Ohio is, but at the same time, kind of, it looks completely natural, but it looks weirdly natural, and it's kind of like something AI would come up with, when you picture the Midwest with a bunch of bait shops and custom canvas places and marinas, Maybe if you gave it that instructions. But one of these places, we passed a bunch of places on the way there, and one of these is the Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge. And I think a lot of the other things that you pass on the way there are also like McGee Marsh and all that stuff. Maybe it's McGee.
Yeah.
McGee Marsh, are sort of affiliated or connected in some way, or add to the places where birds can be safe and things. So I thought I would look it up on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife page, which they are also the people who run it, apparently, because it is a national wildlife refuge. It was founded in 1961, and according to them, protects a network of grasslands and forests. And some of these grasslands are wet, and others are dry. There's also a lot of marshland in there. Some of the forests are sort of, involved in a perpetual tug of war between the marsh, the lake and the land, and they might be more foresty one year and a little more marshy another year. And there's a lot of dead trees sticking up too. They're sort of drowned or half drowned. Apparently, it provides habitat. The purpose is to provide habitat for migratory birds, resident wildlife, and a variety of threatened and endangered species. And it's either 7,000 or 8,000 acres involved, depending on who you ask. I hear 7,000 more often. And but if you include the other connected refuges throughout the complex, it's a total of 10,000 acres.
Oh wow! Yeah.
It's free and dog friendly. I think you got to keep them on leash. Double check about that. But
yeah, please do. Right.
Yeah, there are 10 miles of hiking trails. There's a visitor center near the trailhead. I think that's at McGee Marsh, but I'm not sure. There's an observation deck you can get up on top of, climb some steps and look around. There's a wildlife drive, which I think is like in a tram. I'm not sure. That's open some days and not others. You got to check in advance, where you can just kind of look out the window and have a guide point stuff out to you. There's fishing equipment available at the visitors center. I don't know what they mean by that. For rent, for sale, what is their deal? Something.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and some of the trails are also seasonal because they can be more ecologically delicate at certain times of years. In my experience, mostly in Northwest Ohio, ecologically delicate is a euphemism for muddy. Yeah, and there's also hunting, archery, lessons and demonstrations, biking. You can take e-bikes on most of the trails, birding, non-motorized boating, so, kayaks and canoes, basically, and cross-country skiing, photography, trapping, interestingly, snowshoeing, and ranger-led activities. So lots to do there, including, just real simple stuff like you pop in and look around. And the staff also manages West Sister Island and Cedar Point National Wildlife Refuge. So this is basically, it's northern Ohio. I think I tend to probably wrongly think of Cedar Point as being halfway between Cleveland and Toledo. And so it's close to that. You can do the sort of quiet stuff and then scream and yell and ride roller coasters too. Whee! The Hollow Weekends thing is still going on. And so it was established originally. The reason it was established in 1961 was because of something called the Migratory Bird Conservation Act. And it was purchased from a bunch of hunt clubs and farmers who had farms up there that were made into this. And it's home to several bald eagles, apparently. Started with only 4,000 acres. And another important goal was to preserve a remnant of the Lake Erie coastal wetlands. Now, again, if you're from the Great Lakes region, you may not even, it may look weird and alien because, in Muskegon and Michigan, where I'm from, you got like a giant sandy beach, and the waves just crashing against the shoreline, like in Cleveland, and, you're looking at them from the highway and stuff. And this is not like that. It's just this sort of weird, you're going over the highway and, there's a marsh on both sides. There's a river. There's a creek. There's something else. You're almost always you're just sort of driving through a high point in the swamp a lot of times. And in fact, actually, the Lake Erie marshes are considered to be a part of, like, they're basically the edge of the Great Black Swamp. So it's preserving that too. So it's very neat. It's a neat area.
Yeah, it is. And the last time I was there, I did see bald eagles and trumpeter swans. So
Cool.
It was very nice. All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca. And so now on to ecological news. So we got quite a bit to plow through here. First bit of news, turns out that heat waves are bad for your kidneys.
Wow.
University of Wisconsin published a study on July 31st. Kidney failure deaths. People on dialysis die 15 to 20% higher. There are 50 to 20% higher death rates during heat waves for people on dialysis because their kidneys can't help you preserve the salt that you sweat out of your body. Healthy kidneys, as you're sweating, your body's going, oh, we're losing salt, and the kidneys kind of preserve it. But people on dialysis, their kidneys don't do that, and so
I lost a dialysis patient that was one of my customers when I drove cab during a huge heat wave. After I twisted arms of several friends and guilted them into helping him install his air conditioner for him and cut a board and everything because he ended up dying of a heart attack.
Well, that's what happens when the salt imbalance gets too high. Then that triggers a heart attack. So and there's also other studies have shown that during heat waves there's increased kidney ER visits. People who have chronic kidney disease experience rapid decline. There's more acute kidney damage, so people start having the kidney damages that lead to the chronic kidney disease. And according to the Department of Health and Human Services, last year, 2,300 people died of during heat-related deaths, as opposed to 1,700 in 2022 and 1,600 in 2021. So in just 2 years, the number of people dying from heat waves doubled in the United States. So this year they may double again. All right, next story, off to Australia. Smart Energy Council published on their website 9/17/24. Coalition's nuclear plan to switch off solar for up to 3 million homes. So the situation down there is they're having this big election, and this coalition of right-wing political groups are trying to take over the government, and they are pushing nuclear power as the way they're going to, the big change they're going to make.
So much for the small government right.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're planning to build 7 nuclear plants, 11 gigawatts of power. It's going to take, more than a decade to build it. But once it's built, nukes can't ramp up and down. They have to go full blast all the time. And so the conservatives' plan is to switch off the solar panels that about a third of Australians now have solar panels on their roof. And they save an average of $1,000 a year on their electric bills. And the conservatives don't like that.
Yeah.
People not paying money to the big, utilities that are giving us campaign contributions. We can't have that. So that's their plan now. It's come out that they're going to switch off everybody's solar panels so they can run their big nuclear plants. And of course, the whole thing's a scam because it'll take more than a decade to build these plants, and we'll all be cooked by then, according to the way things are going. So anyway, I want to follow that bad news up with some local good news. Grand Rapids, Michigan. This is a story that was on 13 ABC News up there in Detroit on September 16th. And the title is City of East Grand Rapids Installs Solar on City Buildings. Estimates savings of over $240,000 over 25 years.
Nice job.
Yes, and basically the city has decided, well, they've already done it. They've put solar panels on all their city buildings, the community center, the library, public safety building, public works complex. And this is going to save them a ton of energy and a ton of money. It's part of a 2022 climate action plan that includes things like composting, bike lanes, and a lot of tree planting. And it's just a breath of fresh air. It's so nice when something like this actually goes through and is implemented. That's as opposed to the climate inaction plan that Bowling Green just came out with, which basically they're just going to paint some roofs white is their plan, but nothing about increasing solar, panels, nothing about insulating, nothing about doing anything except maybe painting some buildings white. So it's nice to see a city that follows through on what needs to be done. And basically this story should be so commonplace that we wouldn't even have to report on it.
Yeah.
Basically every municipality all over Ohio, all over the country should be putting panels on every municipal building. And, we could shut down more coal plants and more nuke plants, and it would be good. So, but anyway, congratulations to the people of East Grand Rapids, Michigan. Then, okay, next story. This comes to us from Electrek, and it was September 17th. And we're talking about wind turbine. Now, this is both a good news story and a bad news story at the same time. So the good news is globally, orders for wind turbines grew 23% from 2022 to 2023. There's a total of 91 gigawatts. It's roughly 100 nuclear plants worth of wind turbines have been ordered now. The investment in wind has gone up it's $42 billion in 2024. That's a 3% increase. And actually, it's kind of a testament that with only a 3% increase in investment, you get a 23% increase in orders. And that's how rapidly costs are dropping for wind power. But the bad news is that 2/3 of this is in China. Okay. And actually, if you look at North America and Europe, their orders for wind turbines have dropped by 42%. So most of the orders that do exist, there were 30 gigawatts of offshore wind ordered, and 21 of that was European and U.S. gigawatts. So So we are building more turbines, but the rate has declined by 42%. And globally, if you subtract China, then the rate of wind turbine orders has dropped by 16%. And once again, we can turn to Bowling Green, where the municipality is planning to tear down its wind turbines in this coming year, which this is the direct result of government policies. That's why wind is being discouraged around the country, because they're throwing up bureaucratic roadblocks to prevent wind from really supplying. It could be supplying more than 40% of our power nationwide, just wind alone. But basically,
And then they can sit there and say, "Oh, see, there's not enough wind. Wind isn't enough. Wind won't work."
yeah,
After
don't
they
have
got
enough
rid of
turbines.
it.
Right, because they
On
outlawed
purpose.
the turbines, right?
Yes.
Exactly. So it's a good news, bad news story, but at least globally, the wind global orders have increased by 23%, which globally will help with reducing carbon emissions. So that is good. So, okay, next story. Kimberly-Clark. This is a big forest products company, paper making company. They're the ones who make Kleenex and Cottonelle. They have committed to reducing their use of natural forest fibers by 50% and by 2025. So half by next year, which is a pretty significant cut. And they're aiming to source 90% of the tissue fiber they use to make paper from environmentally preferred sources, which is either recycled paper or paper which has been, which is not old growth wood, but wood that's like being sort of essentially farmed. And so this is good. This is Kleenex and Cottonelle, made by Kimberly-Clark. This is versus like Charmin, which is made by Procter and Gamble. So if you're if you care about the ecological source of your toilet paper, you do want to get the Cottonelle and not the Charmin.
All right. Good to know.
Yeah. And again, we're not getting money for any of this. You mentioned Cedar Point. We're not.
Yeah.
This is all just we're reporting this as news.
Give us a call.
Okay. Next story, and we're moving right along here at a good pace. September 18th, 2024. This is from our friends at PEER, Public Employees Environmental Responsibility.org. And the title was EPA Scientist Punished for Identifying Chemical Risks. And it turns out that the EPA retaliated against 3 scientists who were trying to do their job and actually do risk assessments for new chemicals. And these scientists, they had their performance ratings dropped. They were passed over for promotion. They got transferred out of the new chemicals program because they were trying to actually test and regulate new chemicals.
Oy.
And according to them, they faced ridiculous pressure to just approve everything. And some of these chemicals, their results of their research were actually altered. Some of the chemicals that they were testing, they found they caused birth defects, they caused fetal death, they caused cancer. And the higher ups just rewrote the report so that, they no longer do that. This practice started under Trump, but it has continued under Biden.
Yeah, figures.
So it's not, this has not been solved by electing a Democrat. All of this is the result of the 2016 Toxic Substances Control Act, which gives the EPA 90 days to review a new proposed chemical. The thing is that this Control Act has utterly failed in controlling anything, because so far there have been 3,800 reviews of new chemicals, and none of them, 0, have been restricted or barred from entering the marketplace. And even though these scientists have clearly said their research was showing that a lot of them should have been forbidden. So in this case, we can say with great confidence that the EPA literally is not functioning even under the Democratic administration. And I do want to list the names of these folks because, these are heroes, essentially. They stuck to their guns. They didn't sign off on the fake reports, and they got punished for it. But The names of these three researchers, this was identified by the Office of the Inspector General at EPA. So this is the official story. Sarah Gallagher, Martin Phillips, and William Irwin all showed a kind of bravery that we need a whole lot more of in this society. Okay, final story. Unfortunately, this is also a bad one. Reuters, September 20th. The U.S. House votes to repeal Biden administration tailpipe emission rules. Essentially, the EPA has created regulations that would require automakers to switch to electric vehicles more rapidly. It would cut tailpipe emissions 50% from 2026 to 2032. So, and I want to stress this. Okay, this rule wasn't even going to go into effect until 2026. So automakers would have 2 more years to bump up their tailpipe emissions. And it doesn't take effect, until 2032. And so this law, this regulation was too little, too late. All right. So it's cutting it 50%, but that's not enough, and it's not fast enough. But even that was too much for the Republicans in the House of Representatives. They repealed the rule and wrote a law that bars the EPA from enacting any future regulations. And so the EPA had already caved on this rule. They had dropped the requirement, the goal of having the U.S. car fleet be 67% EV by 2032. They dropped that down to 35%, which it's already almost at 35%. So this is completely useless. The White House said they will veto this law if it gets to the president's desk, if it passes the Senate. But it's just a sad commentary that the House of Representatives, even after all this stuff that's happening around them, even as their country burns and wilts, they're passing laws to make the problem worse. So bad on you, U.S. House of Representatives. All right, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And I'm Rebecca Wood. Keep cool, babies.
Keep cool, and we are signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more 3-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No